Welcome to Pharmacy View podcast, where we provide regular interviews with pharmacists and key people within the Australian pharmacy and associated industry. In this stream of podcast episodes, we discuss aspects of technology or business operation and how each area interacts with guests' current role or pharmacy-related business. I'm your host, Scott Carpenter, and my guest today is proudly brought to you by Shopfront Solutions for all your digital, shelf and marketing needs, part of the Arian Technologies Group. My guest today is pharmacist John Shanks, Director of Kraken Coding, Healthcare Application Development Company. Welcome, John.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks for having me.
No, pleasure. And, I haven't met you in person, but again, I was intrigued by a little bit of information that you put out through social media, enough for you to reach out to me and for me to actually reach back to you. And I guess it's good to hear today what you've been doing. So for those listening today that do not know, who is pharmacist John Shanks?
Yeah, so I'm a mid-career pharmacist. I grew up in Lithgow on the west side of the Blue Mountains. Did my pharmacy degree at Newcastle Uni, which was the Masters of Pharmacy back then. After I did my Masters, I was at a crossroads, I think like a lot of interns, to deciding on whether I'd do community or hospital pharmacy. And I landed on hospital because I got an internship at Coffs Harbour Base Hospital. Finished that. Did another 6 months or so as a floor pharmacist, and then made my way up the coast to Darwin, where I've been ever since.
And doing community pharmacy or hospital pharmacy today?
So yeah, pretty much exclusively hospital for me. I've done a little bit of community pharmacy. That was in Brisbane. Me and my partner, we, after the intern year, we bought a 1969 beat up old Toyota Coaster minibus, and we made our way up the coast, and we made it to Normanton, and then one of the wheel bearings exploded, and we were stuck there for about 2 weeks, and it cost a fair bit to get it all fixed up. So then I went for a locum job in Darwin, and then just ended up here.
The rest, as they say, is your history.
That's it. That's a pretty standard story, I think, here in Darwin. I really enjoyed hospital. I think as an entry-level pharmacist, I got a bit stressed out, as you generally do. I'd probably try a bit too hard. I'd review patients during the day, but it was pretty busy, the old Darwin Hospital. So quite often I'd get worried after a busy day. I'd drive back into the hospital in the evening and just double-check charts and make sure I hadn't missed something important. Usually I didn't, but every now and then I found something pretty critical, which I was glad I made the drive back in to do. And after getting getting a bit sick of driving back into work, it was only a couple of blocks, but I started to develop some tools to identify patients of interest and help me out during the day. And I enrolled in an IT master's degree as well to try and, do it properly. And they were pretty successful. So I built a few tools, and I built one with the help of one of the IT staff who were working in NT Health at the time, which identified patients automatically if their renal failure was starting to crash out and they're on a renally cleared medication, or it had about 300 rules in there which would identify patients of interest. If they prescribe something with a weird indication, which isn't normal, or all sorts of things. And I started using that, and it was pretty good. I used to walk around the hospital, and people would be like, "John, how do you know all this stuff?" I'd always walk to bed 24. I'd be like, "Oh, there's a CYP3A4 interaction over there. We'd better sort that out." Yeah, it was good. So that was pretty successful, that app. And made another one which was for antimicrobial decision support pathways, which we developed as a open source project. I think we had 15 hospitals in its heyday involved in the project. And the idea was we'd just have an open source code base where we could build decision support pathways. So it would ask a series of questions like, does the patient have a penicillin allergy? How's their renal function? Are they elderly? Where's the site of infection, et cetera? And then it would say, all right, in this scenario, this is exactly what you do. And to sort of get rid of the white noise and make it so you couldn't really make a mistake. when you're reading a guideline.
Yep.
And that was generally successful, that app, except people didn't really like to learn HTML or JavaScript to update it. Yeah, I can't believe it. Yeah. So it eventually flunked. The first sign of that was Echuca Hospital. They were great guys and got on board with the project, but then eventually they just couldn't keep it up to date. And with the staff churn down there, they decided, we can't keep it updated. We're going to drop the platform, which sort of said to me, it's not really sustainable to have an open source health tech project. I think it's probably pretty naive. In the younger days.
Yeah, so my reading to that was that the application was right. It was just to remain viable, it needed to be continually updated, and that was ultimately the problem. And I guess the unprecedented years in recent times of just getting people to show up for work at all would have actually exacerbated that as well. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I wish I'd gone a different direction in my career probably. So that project kind of flunked out. And so then I moved into a management role, more towards the IT side of things, in NT Health. And that was okay for a while. And then I got unintentionally promoted to a senior executive level position, and I didn't love that. Too much. Yeah. I was in that job for about a year. And the whole time I was sort of thinking, I'm not really enjoying this senior management side of things, especially in government. I think, it's kind of like wading through mud. You want to make change, but you just can't. So, eventually I just canned it all and went, when I was happiest in my life was when I was doing this open source project and I was building apps on the wards to try and identify patients and pretending I was a genius when really it was just like a bunch of nested if statements to identify problem patients. And I thought, I'm just gonna give it up and I'm gonna do what I like doing, and so just quit work altogether and started working full time in the startup and doing the same sort of stuff. It's been amazing.
So it's interesting through that conversation. I've obviously had the opportunity to meet thousands of pharmacists and interview here on the podcast quite a few pharmacists that there seems to be, from my perspective anyway, a definite link between pharmacists and IT technology platforms. And what I mean by that is that as much as a pharmacist might be busy dispensing, filling forms, etc., the whole time I'm imagining your brains ticking over saying, how can I make this faster? How can I make this easier? That's what this is about, isn't it? You've taken your core skill that you were trained in, which is pharmacy. You've said, actually, this is great, but actually we can make it better. And how can we make that better? So that, I guess, leads on to where you're at today, doesn't it? So
that's it. I was quite fortunate as well when I started doing the startup thing. I did the uni training. That was an online, and I only ended up doing a postgrad dip because what I found really valuable was working with my sister and my brother-in-law, her partner. And I think when we first founded the startup, she was working at Google and he's, a pretty senior developer at Atlassian. And so they helped me a lot. And they probably don't know it, but they really helped me to learn how to, build apps and do it properly. It was pretty funny in the early days, the way I used to do it. And they'd pay me out pretty regularly for doing all sorts of bizarre things. But what that ties into is, I think there are so many parallels in software development and pharmacy, which you don't really realize. And doing pharmacy work has made me such a good software developer because there's that, you're always checking your work. You're always making sure that, you don't make a mistake. And it's that mindset. And a procedural way of doing things. They're almost the same in a way. It sounds funny because they're completely different jobs, but they're actually almost identical in the way you do them. And it's interesting. I think pharmacists, inherently make good software developers. It's just learning another language. That's all.
From that perspective. So let's talk about the platform that certainly piqued my interest, which is Clinical Branches, predominantly built for the hospital. scenario as I understood, but now I've had the opportunity to have a look at a great little YouTube video that you've put up, and we'll include a link for that at this point here. I think I meant to do, if you kind of watch here, the link will pop up, and the question now is that whether that's got an application in pharmacy or not. And I understood from our conversation of the day that you had the opportunity to go to the PSA conference a couple of weeks ago. So talk to us about that.
Yeah, so I was lucky enough to get an invite by the PSA to compete in the Shark Tank with the investor judges there. So the idea, it was a while back. I can remember I heard the chief for the RACGP saw in the news that she'd put a statement out, which was really critical of pharmacist prescribing in Queensland with that trial. And I remember thinking at the time, we were launching clinical branches for WA Health, for WA Country Health, who've been amazing, by the way, and really supportive of our startup. So we were just putting it in there, and I saw that, and I thought, if we had a really structured way of doing pharmacist prescribing, I think we wouldn't have had all those issues with that trial. Not that I don't think they were that bad anyway.
Yep.
Yeah. I reached out to the Guild and the PSA, and the PSA have been very supportive of the idea of building pathways to help pharmacists, not only with pharmacist prescribing, but, with any sort of over-the-counter presentation and even front-of-shop presentations. So I started to build out the platform. It wasn't too much work to change it a little so that it's more community pharmacy-centric rather than, useful for on a hospital ward. And right now I'm really just gauging the market to see whether there's, anyone is interested in this sort of way of retrieving data, retrieving information, rather than using its standard text-based guideline, whether they'd like to follow a pathway. I think there's also some applications for home medicines reviews as well, with the same rules which I use for, prioritizing ward lists for ward pharmacists. I think you could do that with a HMR as well. We've already got rules in there which, look for cardioselective beta blockers with people with diabetes or, changes in renal function or all sorts of things like that. So you could plug the data in and almost generate an HMR automatically. So I think, I suspect there's a fair bit in this space, but, it's hard to know. And, the last thing I want to do is really spend a lot of time, getting into something and then find out people aren't really interested in changing the way they use what processes they do.
Yeah. Now, and I might just clarify there. So this is the hospital scenario you're saying is already quite successful. This is a question around whether it would work in community pharmacy based on, again, your learnings around someone needs to embrace it, someone needs to use it, ensure their team are using it, ensure that the customers are getting used to seeing it, and then continuing developing. And what I noticed on the video was that you could customize it. Whilst there were some standard parameters, I'll use that term, you can actually customize it for your pharmacy scenario, your patient scenario. That was what I understood, wasn't it?
Yeah. So it should have gotten into how it works, really. So what it does,
good time we can do that.
Yeah. It gives you a canvas, basically, which you can drag and drop pages onto, and what we call widgets, which are just like little clinical pieces of information. So it could just be a piece of text, or it could be a calculator for a BMI or a dose, or, you name it. We build a set of widgets which people can just drag onto pages to build pathways. And then you basically build a branching decision tree. And then end users who access the decision tree then just get asked a series of questions on standard web pages which say, okay, does the patient have a penicillin allergy? How old are they? Have they had recurrent cystitis symptoms, something like that. And then they'll say, okay, in this exact scenario, this is what you do. So it can also record which way people go down on the pathways. So if you generate a referral, it'll automatically record everything that you clicked to get to that point. Which is useful. And we also have set it up so that any pathway which anyone builds gets put into a central repository. The idea is, like, I used to hate it when I worked in the hospital, is everyone was plagiarizing each other's procedures. Every state does it. quite openly. And so rather than doing that, you can just click a subscribe button and just subscribe to a pathway which someone else has made with an agreement with them. And if you
So collaboration throughout the industry, is that what you're saying?
That's it. Yeah. We've even got like a discussion forum which tags to the side. And if you contribute in there and you make a recommendation and someone accepts it, you get like a clinical credits score, and your user ranking sort of goes up as a contributor.
Okay.
So I think is a nice little thing. You can also customize. You can customize widgets within the pathways so that your users, when they look at it, will see like a different phone number compared to, if a person in South Australia sees it. Yeah. Or if you've got a different recommendation for treatment. So you can still keep the same pathway structure, but have little local variations as well. So you don't have to rebuild a whole new one to subscribe to someone else's pathway. So the whole idea is it's just a platform to share decision support, whether it be a decision support rule to identify, a patient who's missing an INR or warfarin or something like that, or whether it's a whole pathway on how to manage, a UTI or a cough or, you name it. So we've only built out 3 community pharmacy pathways at the moment: emergency contraception, cough, and cystitis.
Yep.
But I'm interested. I'm interested to see. I've really enjoyed building them, and I want to see whether there's anyone out there who wants to use them.
take them up. Yeah. So, and I guess that's a good call out then at this point in time. So from what we've discussed today, if there's a listener today in the community pharmacy industry, had their interest piqued, John's contact details will be part of the either the show notes or even included here in the recording. And by all means, reach out to John and have that next chat. And I would stay in touch then from that perspective. So, is there anything else around clinical branches that we need to be aware of in terms of what the future looks like or what it could do?
Yeah, well, I had an interesting request recently by one of the obstetricians at Darwin Hospital, and she wanted to build an app which talked to patients before they came into hospital to try and triage whether they're appropriate for hospital admission or not, and to help them with their concerns. And so it's like a chatbot. And so I started playing around with the GPT API, the programming interface. So you can send little packets to GPT, and then it'll give you a recommendation based on what you send to it. And it's been pretty cool. So what we can do, and what I'm really interested to do as a project, is when we build these pathways and these decision trees, you can actually send, whenever someone lands on a page, rather than actually show them a page, you can have a chat screen where it says, "Hi, what do you want help with?" And you can say, "Oh, I've had a pretty bad cough," and then we can send a packet to GPT and say, based on that information from that person, what's the best pathway we should start on? And then it'll go to the best pathway, and then it will then say, "Okay, how long have you had the cough?" And the patient can then write in there, and you can send that to GPT and say, based on that, which of these options would be the response to that patient. And it's been pretty fun playing with this API. And so what I want to do now is build a little chatbot for pre-triaging patients. And this would be for, it'd be either for, I think, ED departments or community pharmacies to decide whether at all they should come to your pharmacy or just go straight to the GP, and then what you can offer them. And so that, I think it'd be good for the people who are a bit socially anxious and don't really want to come into the pharmacy. You could just chat to a little chatbot and say, "Oh, this is my problem," and I'll say, "Oh, well, in your case, we probably recommend zinc lozenges, guaifenesin, it's like, and that's and come into your local pharmacy for that." So I'm pretty keen to play around with that, mainly just because it's a lot of fun. It would also need therapeutic goods registration as software as a medical device, though, because we're using AI, and so that meets the criteria. But from what how I've been using it, it's pretty on the money, because it's what ChatGPT was originally made for, was for chat.
Yes. So when you say chat, you're talking typing chat or voice
so
chat?
it'd be like a messenger screen on your phone, and you'd have a little robot talking to you and saying, "Hi, what do you need help with?" And then you just talk to it as a human being, and it guides you along a pathway. So it's like ChatGPT on rails. basically.
Yep.
Yeah, and you can build the pathways in clinical branches as you would for any other pathway, but build a pathway for a patient to follow.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's an interesting direction. I'd like to go in. But Scott, you can throw a rock anywhere, and there's something fun you can do.
Yeah. Well, and again, I guess as you've described that to me, if I'm a human being in a community, and I know from a Google perspective, some of this is there anyway, but you're saying this is more from a professional practice standards. There could be an app that's available here in my local community. I've got a cough. Hey, do I need to go and see my doctor, or can I go and see my pharmacist? Because I think today that's a big, broad unknown. It's like, if you can get into a doctor today, it can be a challenge. So sometimes the pharmacy could be the easier option, or at least the preliminary option, which I'm not sure if it happens in the Northern Territory, but certainly here in Victoria, we often get the ads on television that says, your nurse on call, your pharmacist are also there for you if you can't get into hospital or medical practice. So that, in my mind, as we're talking about this, says, well, as I said, it's kind of like Dr. Google, which hasn't got a rating, but this is more a professional practice that could be available to me that says, got a scratchy throat. What does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
What are my options? And I could be sitting on the lounge, just typing this into chat, and then ultimately, okay, well, your first step could be go and see your pharmacist and see what they think, because we certainly know that if the pharmacist doesn't believe they're the most appropriate solution, they're going to refer you on to the medical practice anyway, aren't they?
Yep, exactly. So what it would do, what we do with the community pharmacy pathways at the moment is we keep the breadcrumb as the last page. You get a summary of what has been clicked to get to this point.
Yeah.
So I think there's opportunity as well for techs to use pathways out the front of shop to pre-triage patients to see whether they, whether there's a front of shop treatment or whether they need an over-the-counter medication. And it would be the same thing if a patient's interacting with the tool, whether they can, whether they come to the pharmacy or not. And then you could get the breadcrumb of what they've, what their conversation's been to get there, ahead of time. So, I don't know. I'm just playing around.
So, no. But again, I think again, and if I describe it to you this way, because I'm certainly aware from my experience that there's been a range of software platforms available in community pharmacy that could triage a customer before they got to the pharmacist, that with some levels of success. I won't name names or brands as per se, but they've been out there. But to me, they were very static responses. I have a cough. Okay, here's your options. How bad's the cough? But what you're saying to me now with AI, ChatGPT technology, it's not a static response. It's actually more a living response. If virtual reality is a living thing, but it kind of is these days, isn't it?
Yeah. So you just have to tell it in the prompt, can you please respond in a conversational manner? And then it selects, it moves through the pathway as if you were clicking pages, except you're actually, you're talking to a robot. It's a bit bizarre. Yeah.
And the other thing I think I liked from, if I understood your conversation, was that any chat that I've had with any kind of link or referral relative to me is a document at the end, isn't it? That could become a referral. And I think that was the other thing that I really kind of piqued my interest here, is that this is something that could then be handed on to a pharmacist. Well, okay, here's how I got to here. And the pharmacist can have a quick look at that. Whereas without that, the pharmacist is starting again, aren't they?
Yeah. You wouldn't even need to hand it to them. So the way it's set up right now, all the pathway breadcrumbs go into a central, like a database for that pharmacy. And so you can search all the pathways that have been followed for your pharmacy and see which direction people have been going. So you can go back in time and search any breadcrumb, and anything which results in a referral. Then it also asks, can you just pop the patient's name in? And so then it'll also generate a referral letter, which you can print, and it'll save that referral so that then you're not liable in the future. If if someone says, oh, well, why didn't you tell me to see the GP? You've got that paper record to say, well, we definitely did. Yeah.
From there, cool. John, we're coming to the end of our time, which I did say to you, this chat could go very quickly. But was there anything else on your list of notes or points that we haven't covered off so far?
No, I think I'm pretty happy. I think the main thing for me is now I'm just interested to see if there's anyone out there who wants to get involved with this project. I'm always keen to just improve decision making for Australian clinical staff. That's what we're all about here.
Cool. And the other thing I'll try and do as part of this recording, so if you're watching this on YouTube, I'll actually try and incorporate John's video silent over the top as we're chatting, so that what you're chatting about makes a little bit more sense. If you're listening to us on a verbal podcast or a recorded podcast, then we'll make sure that the link to John's videos are in the show notes as well to click on from that perspective. So, John, thank you very much for the chat today. I've really enjoyed that. As I said, you piqued my interest anyway. Technology in healthcare, technology in pharmacies, certainly of interest to me, and it was enough to us to reach out and have a chat. So thanks very much for your time today.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you for listening today. Pharmacy View is a technology-focused podcast provided by Melbourne-based business Arian Technologies and Shopfront Solutions. Over the podcast series, our guests include pharmacists, retail managers, wholesalers, suppliers, and industry technology partners. If you would like further information on our podcast series or to participate in one of our episodes, feel free to send me a message or touch base through the Pharmacy View website, pharmacyview.com.au.